And a good, oh my gosh, my headphones and my microphone. And folks, I just blew out my eardrums, so you'll have to shout especially loud when you call. Well, some people that's not going to be a problem for. I went to push down the microphone button. I thought it was on, and I didn't hear myself, so I punched up the what we call the slide pot and still didn't hear myself. And then I looked over and I realized that little red button got stuck and it wasn't on. So I popped it on, but still with the slide pot way up. Then all of a sudden, by the way, some of you I don't care about hearing from anyway, so this will actually be quite a good thing throughout the course of the program this morning. In fact, you could shout and call me all the names you want. I won't even notice. What the heck? Go ahead. Take your best shot today. 38 right now at our studio, 7 minutes after 8 o'clock. I should point out it's a rather gloomy start to the day, and the next few days actually have pretty much the same weather pattern. We may see some snow tomorrow morning. Now, I don't think we're going to be seeing piles of snow around here. But considering all of that really beautiful weather through the winter months, to now come to April and have to deal with this, it is somewhat of a letdown. Once again, I know all of the people out there are saying logically, we need the rain. All right. Granted, I'll take the rain, and I hope it's gone in a few days. And we get to the weekend, we can go outside and do some fun things again. We don't do that when we're at work, do we? No, not at all. Never, ever, ever. Some of the things we're talking about today, Steve Millington will be along in just a few minutes. He is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He's a little annoyed that there are still people working in Boise in the state legislature when they were supposed to be done March 27th. And he'll share some thoughts with us about that. I've also asked him if he could critique some of the Republican candidates for president. Today, Rand Paul. He is the son, of course, of the late congressman. Well, he's not late at all. He's still with us. His father, Ron Paul, served in the House of Representatives. Rand Paul, the younger, that is the son, he serves as a U.S. Senator from Kentucky. Today, he is announcing that he is going to be running for president. You see, you get your ears blown out, you can't even think about anything else. State government, of course, the topic as well. As we pointed out, a couple of things I want to bring up myself a little later in the program if we could. Governor Otter has made it extremely difficult for the abortion-loving crowd to simplify its efforts. In fact, you're going to hear a lot of wailing in the newspaper business. You'll see the editorials coming up that this wasn't a problem, this did not exist in Idaho. And, of course, it won't exist because the governor put the kibosh on it. We'll tell you what that's all about a little later in the program. But one thing I did want to mention at the start of the show today, did anyone see Bill O'Reilly last night? I did not. I was watching baseball. I watched parts of 3 games, parts of 2 games and an entire game yesterday afternoon. Since having signed up for MLB TV, I'm going to be somewhat of a Fox News widow over the course of the next several months. I'll likely read up until about November 1st, somewhere in that particular neighborhood. Bill O'Reilly had a guest on his program last night. I was able to watch some of the tape from it this morning. And the guest is a retired colonel, and he spoke on the show saying that sources are telling him that an investigation done about Bo Bergdahl 5 years ago showed that Bergdahl had intended to join the Taliban and or make contact with the Russian mafia, and that this was well known within military circles. And the investigation turned this up because they were able to talk to some of his fellow soldiers who mentioned the conversations they had with him, as well as some Afghanis who lived in the area near where he was based. What does that mean? Well, he was working often as an intermediary with some of the local villagers. And the local villagers apparently told the investigators that Bergdahl wanted to try to make it to Uzbekistan, where he could then hook up with the Russian mob, perhaps become a hitman for the Russian mafia, or he could perhaps end up working with the Taliban and against the United States. And he had apparently shades of both of these thoughts in his head. Now, at one point during the course of this discussion on O'Reilly last night, O'Reilly said, I think this guy's flipped his lid. And then I started thinking, is someone actually in Washington using Fox News and Bill O'Reilly as a conduit for some disinformation? In other words, to start to lay the groundwork, because the White House is extremely embarrassed by this fellow's backstory now that it has become so evident to the public, and the fact that they traded 5 enemy cutthroats for him, when they could have just left him there and, hey, you know what? So what? He's out of the way. He's out of our sight. Good for that. I don't think a lot of people would have had a problem with him withering on the vine somewhere over in the mountains of Afghanistan. But if you were the White House, you may try to portray him for a public relations effort as being bats. Oh, well, see, he was going to join the Taliban, but he wanted to be a Russian mob hitman, too. So clearly he's a little kooky upstairs. And because of that, he should walk. Oh, we'll get him all of the treatment and the help that he needs. We'll lobotomize him so he'll never be able to talk about it anymore. But that way he won't have to go off and be locked away for all of his crimes against his country. And it'll all be settled, and no one will blame the president for being such a, well, we have a lot of descriptions we could give the man. I see that going on, and I can see that they are laying the groundwork now to convince the tribunal, to convince as well, if it goes beyond the people who will be discussing this case to an actual court-martial, to convince them that Bergdahl was not in his right mind. And I think the whole Russian mob thing has been added. I do believe he wanted to make contact with the Taliban, perhaps because he thought the Taliban could get him out of the country, or perhaps because he wanted to join the Taliban. But the whole Russian mobster business seems to me to be an add-on to try and assist with his defense. And you well know that the White House, for many, many years, stonewalled on this whole story because they would have known about this report in 2010. And now we're just beginning to hear about it. And then the White House as well, we also understand that after Bergdahl was released, there was an effort made because of the midterm elections in November to delay the report that came out a couple of weeks ago, which was just scathing, and said, of course, that he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. It's 8:14. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 38 at our studios. You can give us a shout if you like, 736. You see, again, you blow your eardrums out. You're so concerned with that. You have a tough time putting a thought together. 736-0300. That is a little dyslexic this morning as well. 736-0300. You can also reach me by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And that's an email address, of course, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I spell the last name Colley. It is interesting that we've made it to this point. And the actual hearing, the Bergdahl hearing, I do not believe is scheduled until, July? So he is still actually in uniform, and he is serving at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. I don't think that he is being given duty that would be considered to be risky. He is likely just walking around the base, picking up some trash that he sees blowing along the ground, sticking it into the bag hanging over his shoulder, and they allow him to do this for about 8 hours a day, and then he goes off to a room and sleeps where no one else wants anything to do with him, and they repeat this day after day after day. So he didn't really have a dash to freedom once he was released by President Obama, or at least released by the Taliban, who got much, much more in exchange. It shouldn't surprise you that our enemies get more in these deals. After all, look what was just negotiated with Iran. So the president is not what I would call, despite his reputation as being a great poker player when he was a member of the Illinois State Senate, I would not say that he is a very good card player at this particular stage of the game. Now, I do want to mention some of the other things we have coming up a little bit later in the program. Steve Millington, as I said, will be joining us. He'll be talking about some issues related to state government. The fact of the matter is that state legislative session is gradually coming to a close. Maybe a grinding halt is a better way to put that. We still don't have a transportation deal, and that may be the one sticking point that keeps everyone on the job for a few more days. Also coming up a little bit later in the show, speaking of Mr. Obama's efforts with the Iranians, some of the reactions I'm seeing from people, I don't know if you knew this or not. He did an interview with National Palestinian Radio yesterday, NPR it's called, and he threw Israel under the bus. I mean, he blatantly came right out and said, hey, I did not get any guarantees for Israel's safety because we wanted the deal more than the actual security of our closest ally in that part of the world. I'm paraphrasing, but that is exactly what the man said. It is exactly what the man happens to feel. So we'll mention that if we get a chance a bit later in the program. I'm going to hopscotch across a couple of other things, too, that we may or may not get to, just so I can make a quick mention of them. It appears that a lawsuit is going to go ahead against the Internal Revenue Service, and it may end up as a class action lawsuit. It may include hundreds of Tea Party organizations across the country that had been targeted and intimidated during the 2012 election cycle so that they could try to pull Mr. Obama across the finish line. And that I think is a likely explanation for what was going on. But a judge is basically telling the IRS, you cannot hold the details secret on all of this. You have to turn that over. And if that happens, this could be the death knell for the IRS. Because, again, one of those guys who was announcing for president today is calling for the abolishment of the IRS. He will be the second Republican tossing his hat into the ring who's actually called for that particular end to that institution, which a lot of us think would be a wonderful thing. A great way to get started on revamping a tax system that is long in need of some sort of recovery. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the governor signing a bill that will eliminate the possibility of what they call tele-abortion in the state of Idaho. So if we get a chance, we'll look at that in some depth a bit later. The UN climate chief. Do you know that they have a climate chief at the UN? She has stated that we need to have fewer people around the world. So they're hoping for more telemedicine. That they could use for performing abortions. So these are types of things that we'll be talking about a little bit later in the program. In the meantime, I want to see if we can get a shouter on the air with us. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. I've got a question, though, is that hopefully they do this IRS investigation. They didn't use the same server as Hillary did for their emails. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, Lois Lerner, who will not face any charges, that's how that particular situation works. She's not going to be facing any charges. You're aware of that, right? They're going to let her skate on all of this. Nobody any longer in politics, especially if you have a D behind your name, you don't have to actually face any punishment for your crimes. You can lie through your teeth like Harry Reid. You can lie like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton may have endangered state security, but that's not a big deal because she's a Democrat. The only person who's actually going to be in any serious trouble because he's a Democrat is Mr. Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, because he opposed the president on a number of issues. And so therefore he has to be taken out. That's how mobsters run their operations. So that's the best way you can look at that. But Lois Lerner's emails were mostly, even though she claimed that they had been destroyed, they were mostly recovered. And my guess is, if they could ever get their hands on the server that Hillary Clinton, even though she says it was wiped clean, if Congress could ever get its hands on that server, I think they could recover all of the email transmissions. And if they were really willing to do it, subpoena a great many other people who worked with her. And I would guess you could get the same emails from those people as well. Stories for another day, obviously, but surely we'll get to those at some point. Wanted to point out you're listening to Top Story with Bill Colley. No snow today, snow in the forecast for tomorrow morning. 38 at our studios. Going to be a rather chilly day, in fact, a rather chilly week. Other than that, at least we don't have any tornadoes or hurricanes on the horizon. No one's complaining, right? We've got more coming up. It's 8:20. I wanted to point out you could reach our program today by calling 736-0300, 736-0300, or you can send me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. The last name is spelled Colley. Hey, I've got to tell you, I got an interesting comment the other day from something I posted at our website. And the writer's name is Rob. He wrote in because I was talking about the problems with Idaho's transportation bill. And, you know, I've got to be honest with you. I'm a conservative fellow, and I don't like paying a lot of taxes. But what gets me is there's this notion that somehow that the roads will fix themselves. I said it yesterday. Manna is not going to fall from heaven, making that possible. And so this fellow Rob commented on my post the other day that I had put up on our website Friday afternoon, just before I left here on my way out the door, Good Friday. And he commented and he said, you've got to remember, he said, I think that in Idaho, even though we are a Republican-controlled state, his point was, he said, I think we have two Republican parties competing. And he said, I'll call it the establishment Republican Party. And they're a little nervous about being accused right now of raising any taxes because then you've got the insurgency. I won't call them Tea Party. That word gets overused. It's way overused. Richard Nixon called them the silent majority. You can call them a lot of different things, but they're just your dyed-in-the-wool, rank-and-file Republicans in many cases. And what he was trying to point out, what he was trying to share with me, is that if you are a Republican who is currently sitting in an office and you raise taxes, someone may come along and primary you, and they're just going to start referring to that tax increase over, especially if it's a 7 cent a gallon, a tax increase for gasoline. And he said it is almost political suicide for the establishment to go through with this. And his point is that what we have going on right now is this sort of tug of war, this headbutting between these two different groups of Republicans. Democrats don't really factor in this because there are so few of them in the state of Idaho. Now, somebody we can ask about this who might have a bit of an insight, Steve Millington joining us, because you are the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Do you think that that's maybe a good explanation?
I think that your person who commented to you has a pretty good view of what's actually going on. I thought we were going to be all done last week. The transportation funding bill had gone approved by the House, sent to the Senate, and was immediately rejected at the Senate. Well, I think what we really have happening here is this end of the building doesn't like what that end of the building is doing, and the House members are a little bit more of this polarity that your guest suggested. We have the old established, and then we have the dyed-in-the-wool. Let's call them we don't want to call them Tea Partiers. They're just the other Republicans. Those two groups are still battling it out. And frankly, I think that Speaker Bedke and Majority Leader Mike Moyle really were fortunate to get all of the group together and get a compromise on this transportation funding tax issue all put together at one time and sent out. The problem was that they didn't get quite enough input from the Senate, and they got a little bit upset over there. The other part of that is that there was 3 basic items included in that bill, and normally in the Idaho process, they don't have a smorgasbord of ideas. We want one item on this bill and the next item on another bill and so forth, so that they can look at each one of them individually. That avoids the process that we see so often in national politics, where we have all of these amendments to a bill that include miscellaneous, trivia.
Well, hold on to that thought for a moment. We may have a telephone caller.
Oh, good.
Looking to try. Actually, I think we've got the caller. My rollover line just went crazy here, but I think we've got our caller. Got a couple of minutes before our next break. You're listening to Top Story. Our guest right now, Steve Millington, in studio with us until 9 o'clock this morning. And you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com, and Top Story with Bill Colley. You're up next.
Yes, I was wondering why they were not able to have a tax on alcohol and cigarettes to help pay for the roads. And I'll hang up and listen to my answer.
Good question.
That's an excellent question. Normally, the alcohol and tobacco stuff goes into the general fund rather than to the transportation fund. And even though, everybody's always looking for new sources of revenue, and the quote, sin taxes, unquote, tobacco and alcohol, always seem to come right to the front of the crowd all the time. I don't think that it would take a major shift in thinking to get the money from alcohol and tobacco into the transportation fund. And there is a real line of demarcation between general fund issues and transportation issues. And over years and years of handling these two things, transportation is in their own world and general fund issues are in their world. And so trying to take those two elements and putting them in transportation funding, that would require a major shift in tax policy.
As a non-smoker, that puts me in a non-smoking special interest group. You can go ahead and triple the taxes on that stuff. I don't care.
Yeah,
that's how most people feel, right?
And that's one of the reasons why it makes it easy to increase taxes on tobacco and alcohol.
Right.
Is that there's not a majority of users, and so there's a few people pay the tax. The rest of us skate by with no impact.
It's 8:30. We've got more with Steve Millington coming up on Top Story. I wanted to mention before we move along that I have some folks who've been very good to this program in 90-some days that I've been hosting it after taking over for the great one, who I think is out fishing today. Kelly is somewhere either taking some pictures or fishing or I don't know, maybe he's plowing the back 40. Any number of things that he'd rather be doing, I guess, than sitting here. But we have some people who make this show possible, including Western States Bus Services, where they are hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled, no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Joining us in the studio this half hour of the program is Steve Millington. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 8:34, the temperature 38. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And this is, of course, Top Story with Bill Colley. We have another caller already.
Good, let's take him.
Probably one of the smokers getting ready to give me an earful. But see, I blew my ears out at 8:06 this morning, so I don't worry about it. You're on the air. Good morning. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning. I am one of those silent people that the wave is coming. I know where Steve stands, and I'm still trying to figure out where you stand. But I still think that we could pay for a lot if we go in there and cut out all the pork that's in there. And I know there is. There's just no way around it. We need to start making bills that stand alone and stop hiding stuff behind other things so people can get what they want. And we could pay for a lot more stuff.
You know, that's a very interesting observation. You may have heard me mention a week ago that we thought we had a transportation funding bill, and and the Senate just refused to even consider it. And that was even after Bedke and Moyle went over to the Senate chambers and lobbied for their position. And they just said, no way, it's not even going to committee. Well, I made a couple of phone calls and asked a few questions, and I said, what happened? And they told me, in Idaho, our bills are mostly, if not entirely, single-issue items. And they put a 3-issue deal together: gas taxes, registration fees, elimination of sales tax on food, and the elimination of the grocery tax credit, all bundled together in one piece. Well, that's just an example of our caller when he said, let's keep these bills separate and single and address them one at a time so that we don't get a big pork barrel of items shoved together. And because the top item is our preference, we overlook all those things that are included at the bottom of the page. So he's got a very good point. Now, I'm not naive. Well, I am naive, but I'm not naive enough to believe that Idaho escapes the problem of too much pork in our process and too much, perhaps, inefficiency in the way we do things. Now, state employees and those who deal with that all the time will say, wait a minute, we're really overworked and we're this and we're that and we're the other. And yet at the same time, there is lots of issues that increase the cost of administering laws and regulations at a state level, and they pass them down to lower entities. And we're really going to get some phone calls here.
Well, I got to make a point to the caller.
Okay.
I think that the federal government has mainly one particular job, and that is to defend us in the time of war, right? That seems to be what constitutionally it's about. And I think in state government, the only real serious responsibility is to maintain the roads because commerce has to move around.
Well, we have the two primary things in the state of Idaho are, number one, constitutionally, we have to provide education. And that single item constitutes about, if we include higher education, the colleges, universities, it's about 62 or 3% of the total budget. The next single biggest item is transportation. Now, we have put it into its own funding apparatus, but that does not exclude state government from seeing to it that there is appropriate and adequate funding to take care of transportation. Now, if we were Rhode Island or Delaware, it wouldn't be so big a deal.
Not many roads.
They don't have that many roads. But in Idaho, we got 1,700,000 people and 1,600,000 plus. And we got 1 million miles of road.
I think what's going to happen eventually, they're going to start telling a lot of the large ranchers, maintain everything you have on your own and excuse us from that.
Yep.
And they'll offer some deal to leave these people alone, maybe with a little less regulation. And
that is a far out idea, but it's not completely unthinkable. You people live out on this little area, and there's only 10 of you that live out here. We're going to cease road maintenance at the state highway boundary, which is over here, and you guys are going to have to maintain this other 3 miles or 5 miles of road to get into ingress and egress to your properties. The state and the county and the highway districts are not going to be responsible for that.
We've got to take a short break, and I promise we'll get to some of these telephone callers.
We still got more?
Yes.
we really got them wired up today.
Whenever you drop by, that seems to happen.
Good deal.
All right. We've got more with Steve Millington coming up, 39 at our studios, coming up on 840. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our guest in the studio, Steve Millington, and of course, we have some people whenever he's here who would like to talk to him. Steve, either that or just like me today, they want to shout at you. I don't know. It's
well, okay, I'm here. Let's get them on.
It reminds me of my first marriage. I wasn't planning on a second, but it just turned out that way. 39 right now, coming up at 8:44. Bill Colley with you on Top Story along with Steve Millington. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 736-0300. 736-0300. We have a caller joining us, and you're on the air.
Yeah. What happened to the education funding bill to give the teachers raises? That's my question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That particular bill passed the legislature and has been cooked in the books, you might say. They did increase total education spending by $101 million. Let's just call it $100 million plus over the previous year's budget. So the spending went up. If I remember the number right, it's 7.4% over last year's number. Pretty sizable increase, a good shot at fixing a lot of issues there. Included in that is the teacher pay or, quote, career ladder that we refer to in the state of Idaho, and that was also approved and implemented. Now, initially what that says is that teacher pay goes from $31,700 this year to $32,700 next fiscal year. And it stair steps incrementally upward, and I think it caps out at 37 plus or minus. And those teachers who have been in place for some period of time will see their wages move into the $45,000 to $55,000 range. Keep in mind that there was an average posted a couple of months ago that said that in Idaho we do have pretty significant salaries. Idaho's average salary was $50,900. Washington's is 52, California's is 70, but who cares about that? Utah's is 56, Nevada's is 57, Wyoming's is 58. So we are behind our neighbors, but keep in mind our neighbors do not have the real impetus to increase their base salaries like Idaho has. And so when this increase in base beginning salaries gets factored in there, our average salary is going to be closer to 52 or 53.
We may also have a cheaper standard of living, though, than a lot of those states.
It is a little bit cheaper to live here than nearly all of those states.
Yeah,
it'd be hard to use the $57,000 in Nevada and against the $51,000 in Idaho on an average basis. That's not beginning numbers; those are average numbers.
No, we were having an off-air conversation, and we probably should share this with the listening audience because when we first started talking, I mentioned the fact. There's been another explosion. What remains of my eardrums is now gone.
I pulled my microphone too close to my mouth, yes. And I just bumped it. Sorry.
I've been eating mine now for the past 90 days. So we were talking in the beginning about how some Republicans who've been around a long time are worried that if they raise any tax, they're going to face a challenge. And we got talking off air about Raul Labrador, who's probably the best example in the state of Idaho of a guy whose career was made quickly because he challenged those people in an anti-tax position, and he challenged party leaders, and he ends up being not only elected to Congress, but he's perhaps one of the best known of those young Turks now currently serving there.
That's correct. And he took, number one, Labrador is very articulate. He is very well educated. He is an attorney, a lawyer by profession, and so speaking publicly and making his point precisely and accurately is his stock and trade. And he's really polished at that, and that helps a great deal in the public arena. But Labrador has just marked out some turf, and he has defended it very, very comfortably and very well.
He's not concerned that Congressman Simpson doesn't like him. He doesn't seem concerned that Governor Otter doesn't like him. In fact, I think in some respects it could be said that if his trajectory keeps going the way it is, he will eventually eclipse most of these people politically in the state.
He has and there's another element of that we need to kind of address. We talked a little bit about the two houses within the Republican Party.
Right.
Now, the most conservative group of the Republican Party resides not exclusively, but in large measure in what we call the North Idaho arena. And that would be north of, I don't care, Grangeville and so forth, north. They are very conservative elements up north. And that includes all of Congressional District Number 1, and that's Labrador's district. And he almost walks on water to those people up there. The other real conservative element in Idaho is in far eastern Idaho, the Idaho Falls, Rexburg, that area out there. They're very conservative. And of course, they're ruralites, and so they have a tendency to be more conservative. But he has a very strong finding in that his geographical area, and really comes on strong. He makes very few miscues in the public arena, so that he's not having to go back and explain himself over and over again. It's an interesting dichotomy.
You have so few Democrats serving in the state legislature. They seem to be much more unified, but they just don't have the numbers, obviously, to overcome even some of the splits in the Republican Party.
It is interesting that we have seen a couple of really diverse opinion votes. They passed a bill on this cannabis oil, the oil that's crushed from marijuana plant seeds.
Yeah.
And they're going to use it to assist some medical issues. The vote was 39-30. Well, there are 17 Democrats in the House of Representatives. So that tells me that approximately 13 Republicans voted with the Democrats on that particular bill. And so on occasion we see situations where some of the Republicans against a particular issue or measure will vote with the Democrats.
I'm going to make a prediction, and you can tell me if you think I'm right or wrong on this. It's 8:51:39 at our studios. Steve Millington, our guest. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That my prediction is the governor signs this bill because it doesn't hurt him to do it, because it's emotional. It's about little children who have seizures. So if the governor goes ahead, and some people say, well, it's a slippery slope. But if he signs this bill, if I was advising him, I'd say this is pretty much neutral. This is not going to hurt you. And at this point, he's probably thinking about retirement anyway at the end of this term, because he can't do this again.
Well, he could, but he has already publicly stated, this is the end. I'm not running again.
So he's basically stepping down. But no one's, because even the biggest critics, if the governor has a couple of small children there with him as he signs the bill,
it's kind of tough to push rocks or throw rocks at that deal, isn't it?
And that's politics is so much now about the image, the picture that you see. The newspapers learned this a long time ago. They go up to these hearings in Boise, and they take a look. They get a couple of pictures of somebody crying, and they put those on the front page, and that's designed to tug at your heartstrings, right?
That's exactly what they do, and it doesn't make for fair reporting, but it gets people to read the front page.
I was going to say, fair reporting. You mean like Rolling Stone magazine?
Yeah, right. Rolling Stone.
8:52. We have a caller with us. You're on the air with Steve Millington and Bill Colley. Oh, wow. Somebody must have decided every once in a while we must answer their question.
I have alienated my listening audience.
736-0300 is the number to reach us at. Again, 736-0300. So you've got a couple of other issues that really have pretty much gone away. The education bill is now done.
Yep, we got it passed.
It's really only transportation, the only holdup at this point.
The major one, the one that's the largest looming thing is getting education. I mean transportation. Whoa. Time for me to go home, too.
Yes.
Transportation. Now, I think if they break that into separate pieces, then they may have a little bit more possibility of getting it passed. Now, keep in mind that Speaker Bedke and Mike Moyle were able to get enough votes, and it was a substantial, it was like veto-proof numbers, 52 or 53 voted in favor of their bill, which was a 7-cent per gallon gasoline tax and a pretty healthy increase in registration fees, $22 to $24 million a year worth, and they were able to get that passed. So the question now is, if we break this into individual pieces, will they still be able to hold their group together and get it passed? Keep in mind that as of yesterday afternoon, the committee, Transportation Committee in the House, had not put forward a bill to the whole floor of the House for consideration. Now, the expectation was that would probably happen today. And then the whole House would have hearings on it and discussion and debate and so forth. And then it goes back to the Senate where it's going to have to pass the muster.
We have a caller with us.
Good.
I want to thank you for your patience. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Yeah, my question is, why is it that, we never look at education? That's the majority of the state budget. And we, even being a big conservative state, we're so afraid to change things about education because I think there's so much money wasted there. But anytime you mention it, the children.
See that go you
coming back to that whole notion of the pictures, the public relations,
the public relations aspect. The picture on the front page of the paper showing the people standing there crying and bawling, and we have to do this to help them. And the issue with education is always the children, and to a certain extent, you're right. It is about the children, but 80% of most state or most school districts' budgets go to salaries and wages. And so it's teachers, it's more principally than it is students. And I mentioned just briefly a second ago that this next issue would really get me in hot water. But even at that risk, I will jump into hot water. There was a bill passed yesterday, Monday, I think, that says that we are now going to hold the schools responsible to police bullying. So now all of a sudden,
yes.
you talk about additional costs being overlaid.
You'll need an administrator to look over that too.
Well, and more importantly, we're going to now have to hire all kinds of police resource officers to put them in, if not in every school, at least one in every school district, who, amongst all of their other tasks, are now going to be given the responsibility to chase down the bullying issue at schools, and there will be all kinds of disciplinary requirements, suspensions and counseling, and send them to this class and that class, and the parents also are going to have to go with them, and so when we talk about an unintended consequence. Now, none of us are in favor of bullying in schools. I have a personal bullying episode in my life, and one of these days maybe we'll talk about it, and we probably don't have time today. But the real responsibility for bullying rests with the parents.
Yes.
Teach your kids responsibilities and manners and civility, and then it goes away. That it doesn't become a problem in the schools or in the mall or in the movie theater or on the roads or anywhere else, because we have implemented this process of civility but now you see by law, the schools are going to have to step. So here's one more additional cost that the schools are going to have to absorb and oversee. It's a layer of administrative red tape. It probably is not going to be involved in textbooks and teacher training and grades and all the rest of these kinds of things. Now, I understand that kids who are being bullied are going to have a tendency to be withdrawn and less engaged in the process, and as a result, probably not perform as well in the classroom. But we just layered in another level of, somebody's got to pay the bill.
They always like to say it's for a public good. And then, that's, again, we'll have somebody who was bullied on the front page of the paper, tears in their eyes. I want to thank you for coming by. We get to do this again next week.
One quick note. Tomorrow night is Wednesday, the second Wednesday of the month, and the Twin Falls County Republicans have our monthly meeting, Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, City Council Chambers.
Of course, the Democrats are still looking for a building.
We hope to keep them in that dilemma for a long time.
All right, thank you, Steve.
Maybe next week we can talk about the ending of the Idaho legislature.
Yeah, wow.
Wouldn't that be great?
We want to get it done before June.
Yes, let's hope.
39, coming up on 8:59. Fox News at 9 o'clock. One more hour of Top Story with Bill Colley left on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. And we do want to thank Steve Millington for again dropping by from the Twin Falls County Republican Party.
Thank you.
I was just having a conversation off air with Steve Millington before he left. 40 is our temperature. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you, as the big voice said, on 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. We were having a conversation about Republicans getting involved. Well, it's going to get really crowded soon. You've got as many as 15, 16 people who want the Republican Party nomination for president. Some of them have already, Mike Pence of Indiana, if he had held his ground and told the media where they could go, I think that he would be right now, he'd be in that group. He'd be very popular among his fellow Republicans and especially among what they call the base. But because he backed down on religious freedom in his state, I think that he's pretty well out. Lindsey Graham might be a tremendous long shot. Lindsey Graham may be thinking that everyone else will be beamed up into heaven before he gets a chance, and that'll leave him the only option. I think that that's not going to happen. So you've got that going on. John McCain, by the way, is announcing today that he is going to run for U.S. Senate again. So he apparently plans to do a Strom Thurmond and stay there until he's 100 years old, at least, if not longer. But he's not obviously running for president any longer. Mitt Romney has already said that he would not try again. I mean, you do it twice, you're kind of worn out. Except that Mitt Romney, I don't know if you saw this or not, when it came to his brackets, Mitt Romney had Duke, of course, winning last night, which they did. NCAA bracket, Romney, he was in like the 99th percentile. I mean, he apparently knows his college basketball. The president of the United States only got 40% of his brackets right. So in one sense, at least Romney won something when it comes to competing with Barack Obama. So we've got a number of candidates. Ted Cruz already announcing, and shortly Rand Paul will be announcing in Louisville, Kentucky. I mean, in a matter of minutes. And they've got a huge backdrop set up with American flags all over the stage. The problem for Rand Paul is, and I juggle his name around and get him confused constantly with his name with his dad, because people say, well, his dad was a nut or just off his rocker. I don't believe that. I think it was his dad's speaking style that sometimes played to that. But I think a lot of what they talk about is obviously true to form and true to fact. And we cannot afford a lot of things in this country any longer that we used to be able to afford, if we could have afforded it then. And the Pauls have been very good about addressing that and saying, all right, before we go bankrupt, what can we do to stanch the flow of blood? And that's a very admirable approach. But because the world looks a lot more dangerous right now than it did a year ago, that's going to be a problem for Rand Paul. And the Republican Party, I read this morning, Steve had read a similar story. Several Republicans already claim they're going to come out, and they are out for bear when it comes to Rand Paul, because they do not believe he is a true Republican, even though it seems he can attract votes from a lot of people that Republicans don't normally attract them from. So you've still got a whole host of candidates who are going to be showing up. They're going to be coming out of the woodwork. As far as Republicans, Chris Christie is really done. I think that he's going to have to reevaluate. He will not, in the long run, be involved. I think that he's realized it's not his time, and his time may have passed. And I think a lot of Republicans are also grateful for that. The only people that really liked him were the same people that liked Romney and Jeb Bush. And as long as they have one of the three in the race, they're happy with that. Jeb, by the way, who claimed to be the first Latino governor of Florida, because he was married to a Colombian. Also, apparently, when he was registering to vote, when he was governor, put himself down his background as Latino. So there's going to be some problems that he has still coming up. So who does that leave in the middle? If you can't vote for Ted Cruz, some people won't be able to do it because they say, look, I don't care what the law says. He was not born in the USA. Or, I don't think that Ted Cruz overall can win because the media just simply will do everything in its power. Forget what the Democrats will do. The media will do anything in its power to prevent Ted Cruz from ever becoming president of the United States. The Republican Party will do whatever it can to ensure that Rand Paul doesn't become president of the United States. Those of us who are more of what used to be called by mainstream media the Tea Party faction will do whatever we can to prevent Jeb Bush from becoming president of the United States. Who does that then leave among Republican candidates? Well, then the field suddenly starts to narrow quite a bit. And you've got to realize it's going to come down to somebody with name recognition. And Steve and I were talking before he left the studio a few minutes ago. Rick Perry is a name that I keep hearing bounced around. Some of the people who like Rand Paul can't stand Rick Perry. They always point to Perry's involvement with the Council on Foreign Relations, which is right up there for a lot of people on the far right with the Bilderbergs and with the Bohemian Grove crowd. And because of that, they think that Perry sold out and that Perry is just going to be a tool of the globalists. Well, I think that Perry got involved with the Council on Foreign Relations because as governor of Texas, he didn't have a lot of foreign policy experience. And I think he just felt that having that on his resume, he could say, well, I've been in some discussions about all of this. So we have to at least give the guy at least the benefit of the doubt. But the other day, I got, for the very first time in this campaign, I got contacted by Rick Perry's people. They're the first to reach out to me here in little old Twin Falls. So obviously they've got an extensive network already built. And I think that we'll be seeing him pass through this area. Hopefully he'll come here and not necessarily to Boise because we have fewer liberals here. He'll feel much more comfortable. 12 minutes after 9 o'clock, we have a caller with us on Top Story. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
I actually believe if we look at things that way, elect or end up with our Republican candidate, we're going to end up with a Mitt Romney again. I honestly think we need to grab the one that can truly articulate conservatism, mainly without a monitor. And that leaves one person in my mind.
That would be Cruz, right?
Yes, that would. I am sorry, all the issues following him and everything else, but I think he's strong enough to handle it.
Look, I would favor Cruz. I would favor Paul, and I would even, if he were going to do it, I would want Trey Gowdy perhaps. But Gowdy at this stage of the game doesn't have any interest in doing it. But I also have to be a realist and understand that there are great forces, especially moneyed forces, that are going to be allied, and media forces too, against these guys.
Well, yes, I believe that, but look at what they did to Reagan. Look at what the Republican Party itself did to Reagan.
Oh, they did everything they could to try to block him in 76 and 80.
So I actually believe that we're going to see something amazing happen this election, and I'm just going to sit back and wait. But I am already throwing my hat in for Cruz.
Good for you. I think that Ted Cruz is obviously a good man. I point out he will have to battle media. Somebody pointed out among Republicans this morning in one of the stories I was reading that a lot of Republicans say that it's Paul that actually gets treated like a Democrat by establishment media. Why? Well, because of his libertarian background, all of the dope smokers in media, and that might be 85, 90%. They all think that he's going to, give them a pass on all of that. So he's the one that gets treated like a liberal, even though he is probably as a libertarian about as far right as you can actually get. 9:15, you're up next. You're on Top Story.
Yes, I think Cruz being in there is really going to, broaden the landscape, so to speak, because he's such an articulate individual, and he, like I said, his debating skills are going to really show forth. But I also think that Walker has great appeal because he has such great experience and has been down that road and beat them back 3 times in short order. And then, of course, Rubio, you know, his immigration stance has changed back to where it should have been. But he's so articulate, too, that I think that people that really are paying attention, now you understand there's always going to be those people that...
But I'm a little disappointed in Rubio because I see a guy who decided to test which way the wind was blowing and all of a sudden changed his mind again on immigration.
Yeah, I don't doubt you. This is my attitude about this whole thing. I know this. If we would have elected Romney, we would have been better off than we are now. Now, he may not have been the perfect thing, but it would have been better. If we're on an aircraft carrier, it doesn't turn around like a ski boat.
Sure.
So I just, you know, we've got, you know, it's like we've got to have something to change things other than just end up back where we've been. Because, you know, we thought, you know, 8 years of this SOB and 2 more left. And we're, with the things he's done, you wonder if he isn't the Antichrist. Of course, I wouldn't give him that much, you know, credence, but he's something. I know that. So I'm kind of getting off subject. I'll hang up.
Oh, well, I don't mind people talking about the Antichrist, especially in relation to Barack Obama. I have to be honest. I pretty much feel he's an agent of the Antichrist. And you know what? I don't care that the lefty out there doesn't like that. You know, well, you must be a racist. You don't like the first person who's of color to be president of the United States. Well, if you take that logic, Barack Obama is an anti-Semite trying to foster the destruction of Israel. So I've got a logical response for all of you people out there. I just got a text message from a friend of mine listening online, and he says, what about a proven executive and liberal slayer, Scott Walker? And, you know, I'll tell you what, I think Walker has definitely, and as the caller just said, Walker was able to fight off a recall election, got elected twice as governor. He destroyed the power of the unions that were bleeding his state dry. He was magnificent in all of that. Cruz is more articulate, though. And this is really going to come down to, because already Walker has had a couple of those gotcha moments where media tries to, you know, obviously needle him and pin him down, and, you know, they're laying in wait. It's a bit like, you know, got to hear a lot about this the last couple of weeks, especially last week going to church, where you had all of these people who were at the temple, all waiting for Jesus to arrive in Jerusalem to try to trap him with various questions. And of course, being that he was actually God walking around as man, they were incapable of doing that. Scott Walker, none of these guys are quite in that league. And Scott Walker has already had a couple of those moments. We've got to have people who just simply can stand back and tell the media. And Ronald Reagan's success was this. Some goon from the media would show up and try to hit him with one of those gotcha questions. And Reagan was not only able to turn it around, Reagan was able to point out exactly what was going on and make it obvious what the media was up to, because they don't throw these gotcha questions over at the lefties. That doesn't happen. Reagan was able to portray them for what they really are. Crocodiles, vultures, worms, you name it. And people understood that, and they knew what was going on. It was like he pulled back the curtain and said, take a look. Look at this misshapen, ugly, scabies-riddled creature. And people would go, wow, I don't want anything to do with that. Thank you, Mr. Reagan. And so he was appealing to Americans in that sense, even those people. You know, I'll give you a good example. The closest thing right now that I've seen to Reagan is actually May 15th, they will have that election in England. This fellow Nigel Farage, who is the leader of the United Kingdom Independent Party, known as UKIP for short, has an amazing ability to be politically incorrect, to point out the foibles. He did a debate at a leftist university and got eaten alive by the students. When it was over with, they all said, well, yeah, but he knows what he's talking about. They took a poll. He's got an amazing ability to convince people, just like Reagan did. We need someone like that here. I want to mention tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Russell Singleton, who's a physician assistant for Tripp Family Medicine, scheduled to join us in studio. Russell is going to be talking about weight loss. And he's going to be talking about it from a medical perspective. What is the best way for you to lose weight? You can lose a lot of weight, but you know what? Do you remember a few years ago when Rush Limbaugh, he dropped about 80 pounds in 4 months on a diet that he was on, and then he ended up, they thought for a moment he had a heart attack. It turned out it wasn't, but he ended up in a hospital in Hawaii because sometimes even that sudden weight loss is a shock to your system. So there are ways to go about doing this, perhaps, that can be considered safe, medically safe. Well, Russell's going to join us tomorrow morning. And if you have questions or comments about that subject, feel free to chime in. That is Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, located, of course, across from the main post office on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls. And they join us every Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Also, I wanted to mention my good friends once more at Western States Bus Services, where they are hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. So there you have it. Thank you very much for taking some time. These are wonderful people who help support this program and keep me on the air and keep the radio station on the air. And I'm so glad that they are with us. In fact, I'd like to find a few more, to be honest with you about that. 9:25, 40 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The National Review piece, Eliana Johnson. Rand Paul is running for the Republican nomination, so now the party is ready to attack him. That's what I was thinking about earlier. I just could not quite remember the name of all of that, but I wanted to share that with you if I could this morning. I also made a quick reference, and so did a caller, to the president's relationship perhaps with a deity not of our approval. Deity may be the wrong word. Of a fallen angel. The darker reaches, the nether reaches, whatever you'd like to call it. I bring this up because the president did an interview yesterday, and I've got to mention this. The national talkers will probably bring it up, but I just wanted to pass it along because they may still be talking about Rolling Stone magazine for the rest of the day. It brought my blood to a boil when I saw this morning. So he's doing an interview with National Palestinian Radio, NPR, and here's a quote. This is after he signed the deal, or did he sign it? Well, at least he made a deal alone with Iran on Iran's nuclear program. Quote, "The notion that we would condition Iran not getting nuclear weapons in a verifiable deal on Iran, recognizing Israel, is really akin to saying that we won't sign a deal unless the nature of the Iranian regime completely transforms. And I think that is, a fundamental misjudgment," unquote. So he just threw Israel under the bus. Because the argument had been, well, if you're getting a deal with these people, why don't you have them acknowledge that Israel has a right to exist as a state? And he said he did not do that because he said he would not have gotten the deal. So, therefore, the most valuable ally the United States has in that part of the world, and other than England, maybe the most valuable ally the United States has had around the world the last 50 years, just got tossed under the wheels of the bus so that he could go and cut this deal. And there's more. Here's another quote from this story. Quote, "I want to return to this point. We want Iran not to have nuclear weapons precisely because we can't bank on the nature of the regime changing," unquote. You know, there are many ways you could force regime change over there. Most of it just really deals with air power. Tomahawk missiles and the like. You don't any more longer need to send troops in. I believe, who was it, his name? He died during the course of the war in Iraq because he was riding around in a personnel carrier. His last name was Kelley. He was an editor at Atlantic magazine. And I'll tell you what, I used to subscribe to that magazine. I actually loved it. I mean, back in the days before the internet, getting that in the mail on a monthly basis was a wonderful thing. And this guy, Kelley, was a proponent of U.S. air power. He said, we keep hearing that people say you can't win a war with air power alone. Well, maybe not when you had to drop bombs and just hope they hit their targets back in 1968. But with all the precision guidance that we have today, he may well be right. And you may not need manned aircraft any longer. Or you just take a Tomahawk missile and you shoot it from somewhere out in the Indian Ocean. You target it in before you shoot it off, and bingo, it hits what it's supposed to hit. So I do not understand the thinking behind this. And then I was reading this from Daniel Pipes, who's a writer on Middle Eastern affairs. In fact, I was talking about Rick Perry's people contacting me earlier. So I know they're trying to lay the groundwork for an appearance at some point for candidate Perry to be on this show sometime in the next several months and maybe going into next year, because we have a March primary now coming up. We've moved that primary date up in Idaho. So a lot of these candidates are going to be making a big push for Idaho voters between now over the next 11 months. Probably after March of 2016, we won't see a whole heck of a lot of them, will we? Not until just before Election Day, if they desperately need a few more votes and they have to come find them here. But I bring this up just because I wanted to mention something Pipes was talking about. He got in touch with me a few years ago and asked me to be on his mailing list. He says, as a man of the left, Mr. Obama sees the U.S. historically having exerted a malign influence on the outside world. Now he's going to even the score. It's 9:30, 40 degrees. There is an old crone who works for the United Nations. A few years ago, she made a statement saying that people around the world should stop producing alcohol because she said that grain could be better used to feed the poor. So she'd like to see it outlawed worldwide. Of course, it is in a lot of your Islamic republics for the reason, of course, that when Muhammad first came along, he was dealing with a lot of drunken people, and he felt that if he could organize them, he needed them sober. So he suddenly said, hey, God says it's prohibited, and I'll chop your head off if you use it. And, of course, the threat to chop someone's head off is a really great deterrent. It's like the old Rodney Dangerfield joke. Remember Rodney Dangerfield saying his dad was a workaholic? Yeah, whenever you mentioned work, he'd get drunk. So you do tend to sometimes change people's behavior through fear. And so that's how that was done. This woman at the United Nations said some years ago, what we needed to do was eliminate alcohol production, and therefore we could use the grains to better feed the world's hungry multitudes. And now she also at the time, I think, said we should be limited, especially in places like the United States, to 2 servings of meat per week. Therefore, there would be less meat production. Therefore, there would be fewer beef cattle grazing all over the world, and we could then take that land and use it for growing, again, food to feed the vegetables to feed the hungry around the world. And she really believed that the United Nations should crack down and should have the power to make this happen around the world, because she said without it, we will ruin the globe. It'll just, go to a cinder block at some point and we'll all be dead because we don't know how to behave ourselves. And if we would only listen to her in the United Nations. Now, you have people in Washington right now. One is in the Oval Office who is a believer in this sort of a world approach. Yet he cannot get the sovereignty of the United States turned over to the United Nations yet because he has opposition in Congress. 9:35, Bill Colley with you, 41 right now. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program by dialing 736-0300. The Daily Caller says today this very same woman has not gone away. She is giving an interview and says, quote, we should really make every effort, unquote, to reduce global population trends to protect the environment and fight global warming. She did that in an interview with something called Climate One. Is that a TV channel? Because on my TV, if you never had a channel 1, it was always 2, 3, 4. The old-fashioned TVs. For all of you under the age of 40, you have no idea what we're talking about. Maybe even under the age of 50. Back in the day, there was something called VHF and UHF. And where I lived, we really didn't have any UHF signals around. And so you had channels 2 through 13, but you only had 3 of those that were actually used. Everything else just was static. Oh, once in a great while, we could turn that UHF dial on, and you'd see there'd be a picture of way in the background. You'd see a frame of Big Bird. You could maybe make it out, but it was in the black and white snow on the screen, and that was it. But this woman goes on to say, quote, obviously less people would exert less pressure on the natural resources, unquote. So how do they go about doing this? Well, they pass out a lot of birth control, and they make abortion easy for people all over the world if they can. Of course, while they may have the people in the Muslim countries on board with the alcohol prohibition, they don't have them on board when it comes to the baby killing prohibition. So they're still struggling with that at the United Nations. The UN argued in 2013 that more people should eat insects for protein and help the environment by reducing the demand for traditional meats from cows, chicken, and pigs. Quote, insects are everywhere and they reproduce quickly and they have high growth and feed conversion rates and a low environmental footprint, unquote, the United Nations reported. Now, if you lived in Minnesota, think about that. You could just put out a couple of mosquito traps every night for dinner. And then, the dead ones that you didn't finish off, you could have them in the morning, maybe with a little sugar. Will they allow you to eat the sugar? I don't know. And you could chew on those. Delicious. So this is what they are actually recommending at the United Nations. Yes, they want you eating bugs. They don't want you eating meat. Well, I guess bugs would be meat, just in a smaller fashion. Yeah, okay. Calls for population controls, the writer says, cooled in the 1980s and 90s after predictions of ecological collapse from overpopulation failed to materialize. But in recent years, some have been pushing for the use of birth control to keep birth rates down in developing countries. So here you go, Agenda 21, back at work. On a worldwide basis, how many people can we eliminate? I wrote a piece about this for our website the other day, and I was talking about conspiracy theories and Alex Jones. And I said, look, they don't need to have the Army go out on maneuvers in the desert Southwest and kick down your doors in the dark of night and install surprisingly martial law by the time you get up in the morning. All they need to do is give you all sorts of cable TV or Roku now or Hulu now or Netflix now. They give you an Xbox as well. They make sure you have some cool sneakers on your feet. And if you're hungry, you get food stamps. It's like the Roman bread and circuses. And the whole time, they're pumping all of these chemicals out that we have on our water table now. Male sperm counts are way down over the last couple of generations. They can quietly eliminate us in that sense, and we're giving them the rope to hang ourselves with. Gee willikers, I've got 500 channels, I've got an Xbox, and I got all the Doritos I want. Why should I complain? Liberty, huh? I'm comfortable the way I am. Look, I've got a lot more coming up. Mike Huckabee, 2 in 10 minutes, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 40 at 9:40. Headline at the Washington Examiner, breaking news alert, job openings at highest level since 2001, but hiring still flat. Why is that? Well, because we're sending all of our high school students off to college so they can take bedwetting 101, go to a lot of parties, get drunk a lot, get a useless degree in basket weaving, and then they can't find work. Meanwhile, we're not training nearly enough people to fill the jobs that are available. Truck driving, we talked about this just a couple of weeks ago. Welding, you've got all of these opportunities out there. You go see your guidance counselor, and your guidance counselor says, we're going to need more people because of the bullying statute in Idaho. So we're going to send you off to basket weaving 101, and you'll get a college degree. You'll rack up $150,000 in debt. You'll need a master's afterwards, so you can only keep working for 3 years until you get that. That'll be another $150,000 in debt. But you know what? You'll be a great sensitivity trainer as we try and eliminate bullying in the state of Idaho. Meanwhile, of course, we won't have anyone to come push dirt around when you try and build a house because no one will know how to operate the heavy equipment. And there you go, 9:45. So the jobs are there. We just aren't training people for them. 42 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I was talking a couple of minutes ago about the United Nations trying to reduce the world population, recommending we eat insects. And because I don't think they're very filling, that's probably why we would reduce the population. We die from either the lack of nutrition or because we just wouldn't want to eat the dang things because they would taste so awful. I've been hearing for years from these people. You always see one of these guys, I'm a practicing Buddhist and I live in Southern California. And I drive a Prius, and I like to bake bees. Bees taste like peanut butter once you bake them in the oven. Trust me. Ha, 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 ha. How about Ed Begley Jr. eating that kind of stuff, and then he gets on a bicycle in the morning? Yes, he literally has a bicycle in his house hooked to his toaster. And what he does is he pedals the bicycle as he's ready for breakfast in the morning. That generates a little bit of friction, which creates the electricity to run his toaster so he can have his morning toast. Which, of course, he's dripping sweat all over as he's eating it, but that's where do we get these people? Meanwhile, how do you reduce the world's population? Well, you go around and try to promote the idea that abortion is a good thing. And, don't trust those crazy Christians because, of course, they're haters. They won't bake cakes and take pictures of gay weddings, for instance. Here in Idaho, we have a preemptive strike against abortion, one form of it. Republican governor, this is from the AP, Republican Governor C.L. Butchotter has signed legislation that will ban Idaho women from receiving abortion-inducing drugs via telemedicine. Here's a question for the AP. Because I guess Republican is now considered a pejorative by people in the establishment media. When you're writing a story about a governor who's a Democrat in another state, do you always identify them in the beginning as Democrat? Or how about when you read a newspaper editorial, it always tells you about, right-wing congressman, but how often do you see that applied left-wing to Democrats? You don't, do you? Anyway, it's just code that the liberals use to talk back and forth to each other with. The writer of the story says, but this is the usual snarky, arrogant media approach. Writes, but telemedicine is not even currently available in the state. Well, and now it won't be. And maybe a few more little babies will actually get to see the light of day. But they're angry about it. In fact, there was a writer at one of our newspapers, I think it's called Times News, a few weeks ago saying, this is a solution in search of a problem. Well, tell you what. We just ensured that it will not be happening here. Of course, over there, they're sitting around today thinking, how can we go promote stories about killing babies? That's what runs through their heads every day where they happen to live. They want to talk about social justice until it comes to that issue. And then they completely forget about that. Speaking of how people operate at the AP, I have been on this subject before. If you're a regular listener of the program, it's how they insinuate things by dropping them into stories. This is about education funding. Now, for all of the screaming Lefty did in Idaho about this, Lefty got what Lefty wanted. Legislation that would increase Idaho's public school funding and boost salary increases for teachers has only one remaining hurdle. That's paragraph 1 of this morning's AP story. The Idaho House approved all 7 pieces of the state's largest budget with almost no discussion on Monday, sending the bills to the governor's desk. Well, maybe they didn't need to discuss it. Are you trying to give the impression that they just simply said, there's a bill, all right, stamp it approved and send it along? Lefty got what Lefty wanted, and yet Lefty, in the writing of this story, still complaining because they didn't sit there and haggle about it for 3 days. I'm sorry, but you can see they drop these little bombs all through this. This is just a little insult at the legislative process. Now, granted, I'm not always friendly about it either, but I'm telling you, you have to have your eyes open and see these things because they're sowing seeds deep down in the subconscious of the reader or the listener, because we'd be reading this perhaps verbatim over the air. And you understand, this is all part of the nefarious plot. It's all been worked out by Edward Bernays in the last century and the Frankfurt School and some of these other organizations to try and influence your thinking process so they can move you along that socialist conundrum, or continuum, excuse me. Well, the first one might have been right. Mike Huckabee up next, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Suppose they could always use burlap or maybe emery cloth, although the latter would be somewhat expensive. 9:54, thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. Bill Colley with you, wrapping up Top Story today in the next few minutes. 43 at our studios. That'll be 9:55 in just a few seconds. I don't want to jump the gun on that, but it will be, just in case you're looking to set your watch. Before we wrap up today, of course, Rush Limbaugh comes along, following the news at 10 o'clock from Fox. The Sean Hannity program. Sean was off yesterday. So we'll have I hope, Sean back today. Otherwise, you get Mark Simone again, or some other fill-in from around the dial who'll pop in. That's coming up after 1 o'clock news today. Glenn Beck after 4 o'clock news, and, of course, Dave Ramsey later tonight. And coast to coast on the overnight for all of you out there who are expecting a visit any day now from the Anunnaki, which would be the Democrat Party field for president next year. That's just a field of one at the moment. Well, 1.5 maybe before you're all said and done. I didn't get to mention it today. The hottest story on talk radio all over the country the last couple of weeks has been this story about religious freedom out of Indiana. If I could, I found something today. I read a piece every morning. I get in my email from a Jewish organization called Mosaic. Getting religion wrong from Indiana to Iran. And I don't like to read things in large snippets on the air, but I think this is worthwhile as we wrap up today's program. I wanted to share this with you. The writer is Lyle Leibovitz and is writing, in its editorial about the Indiana law, the New York Times was frank in admitting that the fault lies not in the law's logic, but in its likely champions. Religious freedom laws, the Times wrote, which were originally intended to protect religious minorities from burdensome laws or regulations, have become increasingly invoked by conservative Christian groups. Mr. Leibovitz says, when you cannot imagine the faithful as anything but mindless boobs, more likely to respond to coercion and hate than to reason, you're likely to see the question of religious freedom not as an absolute good worthy of protection, no matter who its benefactors, but just as one component of a practical political worldview colored by other considerations. And he says, this is why the Times, as well as many suspects of those crying foul over the Indiana law, is willing to accuse local conservative legislators of harboring the most benighted schemes while simultaneously cheering on talks with the murderous theocracy in Iran. In other words, religious freedom is good for everybody until they happen to be a conservative. Then the Times says that's wrong because in the Times' view, conservatives are wrong. And yet, as he points out, they have no problem whatsoever writing editorials praising what the president did with Iran, which is perhaps the most dangerous state on the planet next to North Korea, and maybe the two most dangerous states since the end of the Cold War. Go figure. We also didn't get to talk about this today, but there are a couple of military chaplains who are under fire, and the gay mafia is asking for their removal from service because they had the temerity, when they were talking to the troops, to talk about how the Bible says that we should not have children out of wedlock, and that the Bible also says that we should have relations between one man and one woman, and not same-sex relations, and not between horses, cows, and pigs, and not between 2 men and 1 woman, or 3 women and 5 men. So they are going to lose their jobs with the military. Because why? I guess the logical question is, why would you have chaplains then in the first place? If all you're looking for is a counselor, then go hire a bunch of psychiatrists. It's 9:58. Bill Colley with you. Thank you very much, in fact, for joining me this morning. And thanks to Steve Millington for dropping by. Remember, Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine tomorrow between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'm back in this seat between 8 and 10 tomorrow morning. Rush Limbaugh next, following news.